you. Sorry about that.
I still only see 7. Am I the only one? Oh, I didn't count myself, I don't think. So,
Okay, we are live.
Good evening. I call the May 18th, 2021 meeting of the Community Task Force to order. Thank you for joining us this evening via live stream. We are conducting this meeting online as is allowed by state law under the current state of emergency due to the pandemic. With that being said, could we please have roll call?
Ms. Satyapraya? Mr. Knappe? Ms. Bannister? Ms. Maria?
here.
Ms. Adams?
Here.
Mr. Robinson? Mr. Shoji?
Here.
Mr. Impanza?
Here.
Ms. Mercado? Ms. Smith? Mr. Wang? Ms. Bapana?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Moving on, we are going to be heading into our Anti-Discrimination Ordinance update.
Good evening, task force members. I'm Jennifer Radler. I'm the City of Dublin Law Director. Happy to be with you tonight. We've been asked to provide an overview of federal and state law that prohibits discrimination, as well as a rundown of the local anti-discrimination ordinances that other Central Ohio municipalities have adopted. Our firm actually represents some of the cities that have adopted this type of legislation, so we can provide some background to share this evening. So I'm with me tonight is Jesse Shamp, and Jesse, we're dividing up the presentation, and Jesse's going to run our presentation. So if you can start sharing the screen, we will dive right in. We want to be respectful of your time tonight. We know you have a pretty long agenda. But do feel free to stop us if you have any questions along the way. So we'll just advance to the next slide. So there are federal and state laws currently on the books to protect certain classes of people from discrimination. The slide discusses the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act and the Federal Fair Housing Act. And so they prohibit discrimination based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, and disability. Now, in the Sixth Circuit, we have different layers of federal courts. So district, court of appeals, and then we have the United States Supreme Court. We are in the jurisdiction of the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. And actually, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals has held since 2004 that sexual orientation and identity were protected under the Civil Rights Act. More recently, the Sixth Circuit found an employer's decision to fire a transitioning transgender employee was gender discrimination under Title VII. Then, as it's noted on the slide, the United States Supreme Court, which governs everything in the land, held that sex extended to sexual orientation and gender identity. So we do have federal protection. One of the impetuses behind, I think, adopting local legislation has been sexual orientation and gender identity, and that has been extended recently by the federal law, so it's protected by that. Then the Ohio Revised Code, so the state of Ohio prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, military status, national origin, disability, age, or ancestry. And Ohio law also prohibits discrimination on the basis of familial status in the housing context. Ohio law does not expressly prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender expression or identity, or source of income. Dublin has been approached by an organization dedicated to expanding opportunities for individuals in the housing context. They have inquired as to whether Dublin would pass a source of income protection ordinance. That is the one facet that is not protected by either federal or state law. And source of income, we'll talk about that later on in the presentation, but it refers to a landlord refusing to rent or otherwise transfer property based on the source of income, which could be some of the most commonly discriminated against sources of income are Section 8 vouchers, veterans and disability benefits, and alimony. So in Ohio, we have the Ohio Civil Rights Commission, and they have jurisdiction over any claim relating to discrimination based upon the protected classes that we've identified. So any person alleging discrimination would go to the Ohio Civil Rights Commission, and then they can determine if there is a right to sue. They can do the initial investigation. So there is an agency in Ohio that's dedicated to investigating these types of claims. The slide that's before you right now, basically this is just a really long way of saying that the city does have the authority to pass its own local anti-discrimination protection and to include classes that aren't otherwise reflected in state or federal law. There are other, we've noted just in this slide, a general rundown of the Central Ohio cities that have adopted legislation. When they did that, Hilliard is pending. Jesse in particular has experience with Hilliard, and so he'll talk about these in more detail in just a bit. When we're looking at this type of legislation, there are typically three kind of overarching areas where legislation is meant to address. And so it's discrimination in the employment context, discrimination in the housing context, and discrimination in public accommodations. And that's not just like hotels or it means basically any place that is open to the public where there's some sort of exchange of goods or services that are provided to the general public. Now, I believe that the task force has been working on different definitions. The point of this slide is just to show that precision is really critical when drafting this type of legislation to prevent against legal challenges. The gender identity or expression definition is from Worthington's legislation, and the place of public accommodation definition is from Westerville's. So that's just to provide some context when you're looking at the terms. And the most typical challenges that you see are those based on allegations that the ordinance is void for vagueness. And so it's basically, I can't tell what you are prohibiting discrimination against. And so you have to be very clear in the definitions and exactly what you're prohibiting. And then we have to give appropriate due process. So that means the accused parties have notice of the accusation and then a meaningful opportunity to be heard before a neutral decision maker. And all of the Central Ohio ordinances that we've reviewed, we believe fulfill that classification, that kind of hurdle, legal hurdle for what's required. Another legal concern is sometimes ordinances are challenged because they impede in the free exercise of religion. So the government can regulate conduct, we can't control speech. So religious objections, there are ways to draft these ordinances to give reasonable accommodation to sincerely held religious beliefs without providing widespread shields for discriminatory conduct under the guise of religious beliefs. And this slide includes examples for certain religious practices that have been used. You'll notice that these exceptions generally apply to the use of an organization's own means for its own ends. And for example, a church, if they're selling goods to the general public for commercial purposes, they can't discriminate against any and refuse to sell to any particular person. It's just if you are, say if you are opening a church daycare, but you're only leaving the daycare open to members of that church. But if you're having a bake sale and you're opening it to the general public, everybody has to be allowed to buy a cookie. Okay, so I think this one on remedies and enforcement is where Jesse's going to take over for now.
Excellent. Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you all for having us tonight. At this point, we thought we would sort of address that once you've decided what classes you may want to protect, how do we go about doing that through city systems? And the question that comes before you and the first decision to be made is whether you're going to enforce these ordinances administratively or through the criminal process. Either is legal, so that's purely a policy decision up to the city. We have laid out here some benefits to pursuing an administrative approach. If you pursued this criminally, you're looking at going through the Dublin Mayor's Court, and criminal courts come with certain procedural safeguards, including proof beyond a reasonable doubt, confrontation of the accusers, and a presumption of innocence. And really what that does is it really heightens the bar that you would need to prove a claim of discrimination, whereas administrative hearings are more so of a preponderance of the evidence standard, which means, is it more likely than not that discrimination occurred? I've laid out a few here, and there are a lot of words and a lot of procedural steps, but I think it's just generally, we can go over it pretty quickly. In Westerville, for example, if someone wants to allege discrimination, they file a complaint with the city clerk. The clerk in turn provides that to the city manager and law director. Westerville has chosen to contract with an outside commission, specifically the Columbus Community Relations Commission. They'll conduct the investigation and then deliver a written recommendation back to the city law director. The law director reviews and then decides to either dismiss the claim for want of evidence or forwards it to an independent hearing officer. You can see down at the bottom there, we have some of the penalties. Typically, these are not to exceed $1,000 for a first-time offense. Worthington, on the other hand, they've put a procedure in, and this is also what's being considered in Hilliard right now, that says if any of your alleged discrimination is based on a classification that is already protected under state or federal law, then the city instructs the complainant to go to the body that enforces that. So Jennifer mentioned the Ohio Civil Rights Commission. It protects a lot of the classes we're discussing tonight. And if someone comes to Worthington with a complaint about discrimination on the basis of religion, the city will direct them first to the OCRC. They, of course, reserve the right for sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, and marital status. As we discussed, those are not expressly prohibited by Ohio law. This is a chart. I think it's helpful, although certainly not something we can read out, but it's just something to review at your own pace. It sort of shows what each city in Central Ohio is protecting. I have bolded the categories that are unique to that city. So for example, Westerville protects pregnancy. Worthington protects genetic information. So this is just a sort of one-stop shop for all the information you could need. And then again, the enforcement mechanism for each city down the right-hand side. So what are the options available to Dublin? We have briefly discussed with the City of Columbus Community Relations Commission about conducting preliminary investigations, mainly because we wanted to see if they still had the bandwidth to do that, since they're contracting with several of the other Central Ohio cities. And they have said that they do and are willing to contract with the city if requested. Again, you could have the City of Columbus conduct the preliminary investigation. You could also have them conduct the entire investigation. It's really up to us and how the city decides they want to negotiate with Columbus. There is also the option that the city could form its own commission to conduct at least preliminary review and investigations. Jennifer mentioned source of income as the only class that isn't protected either by state or federal law or state or federal case law. And how we define that, you'll find varying definitions, but this is the best that I've found. It defines it as lawful income derived from wages, Social Security, supplemental security income, all forms of assistance, including rent vouchers and child support. In other words, wherever your money comes from is good enough for source of income protection. And Columbus just recently enacted source of income legislation, and it essentially prohibits a landlord from refusing to rent a property to someone based on the source of their income, whether they're Section 8 housing tenants or child support vouchers, you name it, they have to accept it. There are, of course, some concerns raised. You'll hear from realtors associations or landlord associations. They argue they have the authority to rent their property to who they choose. And there is a court-recognized legitimate concern that tenants be able to pay the necessary rent. So landlords are certainly still permitted to review rental history and credit reports about any prospective tenants. One red flag we threw up from a legal standpoint are prior contracts. And I believe someone asked, well, if we consider this source of income legislation, how does that affect all of the landlord-tenant agreements currently in place? And we would say as the law department is that we should avoid any interference with the existing contracts. The city's job is not to proactively seek out all of the rental contracts in the city and try to find a problem. Someone who has an issue has the responsibility to bring that forward if the city enacts source of income protection. That sort of wraps it up. I know we went through that pretty quickly, but you certainly have all the information, and we're happy to answer any questions.
So, given the summary, thank you. What is I can't tell if there's a recommendation that you guys are making to city or not at this point, and what is that status? Because it sounds like the city has the authority to do what I think the task force would like to see happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a policy decision on whether legislation would be adopted. I mean, I think the task force could, and I defer to Dana on this one, would have the authority to make a recommendation that council consider this type of legislation. We aren't making a recommendation one way or the other. We just wanted to provide the structure of what it would look like if city council decided to move forward with something like that.
And can I just confirm that, I mean, I was happy to hear, it sounds like you guys are confident in the idea that based on current situation and case law and what you've reviewed, that the city does have authority to make some anti-discriminatory changes or establish some new laws for the city in that regard.
The city does have the authority to do that. I think the struggle that some of the other cities have found, they've thought, well, if federal or state law is already protecting it and there are specialized agencies that review this, do we really want to add a local layer? But then there are clearly, the one category that we discussed that isn't protected is source of income.
I had a question. So when we were looking at the section where local cities had their own unique recommendations that they passed, under Reynoldsburg, they had a section where they said they protect natural hairstyles from any type of discrimination. My question for that is, let's say Dublin passes the same type of anti-discrimination ordinance to protect natural hairstyles. If a company in Dublin has, let's say, a rule for your hair length, who wins out in that situation? Is it the company with the hair length rule, or is it Dublin saying protect natural hairstyles?
Jesse, I'll let you take that.
Sure. So, you know,
With Bernardsburg.
this is the, everyone's lawyer's favorite answer is it depends. Typically, if a company has that policy and applies it neutrally to all employees, if they can justify that, for example, I don't know, a safety issue, that hair can't be so long because it could get caught in something, then that is typically permitted under the law. If someone raised that complaint and could not, and the company couldn't show any justification for it, then I think the person who raised the complaint could have an actionable claim. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that.
And can I just follow up on Kofi's point? So does that mean if that, let's say that protection existed and there was a complaint, the complaint about hair, would that be handled by the same authority that would handle a complaint, for example, about source of income discrimination when it comes to housing? Would it all the complaints about classes or protections go to the same place in Dublin? Or whoever Dublin contracts with?
Right. So,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
I guess the only issue would be if we adopted a process like some of the cities did where they referred immediately to OCRC, if there is one of the state protected categories. So we could do that. And since the hair is not one of those classes, then that would go directly to the city's authority, whatever authority the city makes up.
Anybody else have any questions to ask? Thank you for sharing that presentation. We're going to go ahead and move on to our timeline update.
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Chair, before we go on, can we approve the minutes of the April 20th meeting?
Yes, we can.
Thank you.
Members of the task force should have received the minutes of our previous meeting. Does anyone have any questions or changes regarding those minutes? I'll accept the motion to approve the minutes.
I'll move to approve the minutes. Bridget?
Is there a second?
I second. City South.
Any discussion on this motion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 All right, thank you for that. Now give me 1 second as I pull up my timeline update. Are you all able to see this line? Perfect. So currently we are in our June 8th, May 18th meeting. Not including this meeting, we will have 2 to 3 more meetings left. Our June 15th meeting, the purpose of that is to review an initial draft of our DEI plan. After that, June 15th, we're going to discuss the future role of some type of DEI advisory board. Our July task force meeting, we're going to propose resources needed to support our DEI recommendations, also to move to approve our final draft. And August 15th is when we are supposed to report out to City Council. So in between July 20th and August 15th, if it comes that we do need another meeting to refresh or to talk over our final draft, we can definitely fit another meeting in there. So we have two more meetings left. If everyone can lock in for the last few meetings and we can do our best, that would be very appreciated. With that being said, does anyone else have any questions about our timeline?
Can I, does anybody else have any questions? I just wanted to add something.
I just had a question about once they receive our final recommendation there in August, do we have a timeline to which the city will get back to us on their response? Is that something we've already covered or we're going to cover later today? Do we have any information on that?
Do you mean in regards to council's response to your recommendations?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so there's a number of ways they could do that. They could choose to adopt them this evening. They could choose to defer that to a future meeting, so they give themselves some time to look at it. It probably depends on, if we can give them a solid draft, how far in advance of that, so they have time to spend time with it. Or they may even choose to refer it to a standing committee of council for further discussion or review. So they have several options that they can take a look at in order to review it.
Thank you, Dana. And then at that point, if there's more question, do we reconvene as a team to discuss what questions there are, to readdress items that they may have concerns about, or they're just going to give us a yay or nay and move on?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I should have expanded on that. So, it could be very well that they review it, they have questions. They may say, hey, we like these recommendations, but did you think about something else? Or we'd like you to go back if you would and take a look at a couple things, or can you clarify something? There could be any numbers of questions or things that they could have that could send it back to the task force for further consideration or discussion. So before they finally adopt it. So there could be some exchange between council and the task force, if that makes sense.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you, Dana.
Sure.
And the only thing I wanted to point out is to all of us here, but also maybe if you feel comfortable reaching out to one or two other members of the task force that you sort of know, and just sort of, impart to folks that we really do only have a couple more meetings where we're trying to review all of these aspirational goals and priority areas and get input, and then try to get something that we all feel generally reflects our values and what we want to see Dublin look like and be like. And most of us, I suggest, I haven't had a chance to read through everything, and I'm a co-chair, so I'm assuming other people haven't had a chance. So I just ask folks to start now reviewing some of the things that were emailed probably by Deidre in the last couple task force meeting agenda, calendar items. But if you can't find things or you're not sure about topics, you can reach out to any of us. And I just really want everyone's input. And I don't want anyone to feel like they lost an opportunity to share something that might have been included in the task force.
Absolutely. Thank you for that reminder, Bridget. That's a good idea.
As of now, though, even though Dana has continually said that the timeline can change, the last meeting of this task force as it's organized is August, correct?
Technically, that's correct, and you will have met your, the intent to get a recommendation to council. Sorry about that. That you could, get your recommendation to council per the resolution. But again, you will have met that sort of deadline, if you will, which is greatly appreciated. But again, I think council's expectation and my experience with them is they'll want to, you'll be able to continue to exist as a task force until recommendations are adopted. So, but the deadline is what's important. Does that make sense? And I understand part of your recommendation could be to some sort of ongoing body as well. I know that might be discussed as you go along, but that's up to you all. So, that could even pick up and carry on at some point once council would adopt recommendations and start moving forward from there.
Does anybody else have any final comments on our timeline? With that being said, we're going to move on to our subcommittee updates, starting with demographics.
Good evening, members of the task force. It's good to see you. I provided a third draft of the demographics and terminology section of our DEI plan in your packet this week. To be brief, because I know we have other things on the agenda, I incorporated ESAL's suggestion in pulling together Dublin City Schools demographics and incorporating those statistics into the analysis. I also touched up the wording within the terminology to give us some flexibility and to be able to amend that moving forward. I'm open for any questions, comments, concerns regarding the draft, and am open to any alterations.
If no one has any questions for Kirby, we're going to go ahead and move on to our Communication and Education Subcommittee update. Give me a second as I share my screen. Is everyone able to see this fine? Perfect. So starting off our first, I'm going to be pretty brief. We've covered a lot so far in our subcommittee. Starting off with our first key priority areas, public engagement. Within public engagement, we have various aspirational goals. Our first aspirational goal is communication and outreach. The city should work to continuously understand the communal diversity within Dublin while promoting a welcoming environment by building relationships and trust. Our next aspirational goal is leadership and development. The city must promote understanding of Dublin government and the community at large by recruiting diversity into city leadership, development, and education efforts. Next, within public engagement, we have youth engagement. I will turn this over to Will or anybody else in youth who would like to briefly talk about your aspirational goal in youth engagement. All right, that is fine. I'll just go over your aspirational goal really quick. The city should treat the youth of Dublin as relevant stakeholders, engaging and including representatives as much as possible. Next, within public engagement, we have reflective government and city practices. The city should create an interest in local government among diverse members of the community and recruit representatives of varying communities to participate in councils, boards, commissions, and academies. Our next key priority area was community building and inclusion. Within here, our first aspirational goal was to commit to improve Dublin's inclusivity as a community. The city must commit to improving Dublin, the community's inclusivity by providing its residents opportunities to engage in DEI trainings, conversations, and awareness campaigns. Next, to promote Dublin's diversity, it is important that the city take active measures to acknowledge, appreciate, and uplift diversity within community in a public setting whenever possible. And lastly, our next aspirational goal is to support the LGBTQ community. It is imperative to the future of the community that the city take active steps in improving and support of the LGBTQ community. So that is it for the Education and Communication Subcommittee. Is there anybody who would like to make a comment or have a question?
Can I ask, when I have more time, I take a look at this. First of all, they sounded amazing, and I see all the indicators of success. So there's a lot more detail under each one. So if I had any questions, who should I reach out to about that? Is that you, Kofi?
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to answer any question you have about communication and education. Anybody else who has a question, you can reach out to me as well.
Okay.
Hearing no more questions, we'll go on to the youth for their update if they have any. All right. Youth.
Will was going to report out, but it looks like he may be muted.
As Will gets that going, we are going to move on to economic and infrastructure. We'll come back to you.
Okay, just briefly, Economics and Infrastructure Subcommittee, we have not met since our last task force meeting, but we did finalize, this two priority areas, housing and mobility and transportation. If you'll recall, we've already reviewed our economics empowerment priority area, and then we had two more, housing and transportation. So I'm going to go ahead and try to share this list. Can you guys see the priority area, mobility and transportation? No?
No.
All right, I can do this. Hold on just a second. There we go. Here we go. Now, right?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. So under mobility and transportation, we sort of define the priority area in this way. And again, we're open to, this is Erica and Esau and I on the subcommittee. We're open to any input that you guys would like to provide. Critical input or positive suggestions are welcome. The City of Dublin supports a transportation and mobility strategy consistent with our DEI goals that enable Dublin residents, employees, and visitors affordable and efficient modes of transport into and out of the city and modes of transport within the city. So that's the broad priority area. And then under that, we have a couple aspirational goals. The first one is defined as the city prioritizes increasing affordable and efficient modes of transportation for employees of businesses located in the broader Dublin area. And under this aspirational goal, as well as all the other ones from last time and this time, we also have several indicators of success or metrics. So when you look at the documents that Deidre sent, you'll see a lot more details, and these will come to life, I hope, for you. And you might have some specific suggestions for the metrics. Aspirational goal number 2, the city commits to expanding and promoting the Dublin Connector program. And aspirational goal number 3, the city develops and supports programs and strategies which use transportation to meet DEI goals and aspirations. That is it when it comes to mobility and transportation. The third and final priority area for our subcommittee is housing. And I think we have about 5 aspirational goals, but we tried to broadly define what we mean by housing when we're talking about DEI. And currently the draft is the City of Dublin is a welcoming community which recognizes that offering a broad and interspersed mix of housing options is integral to a thriving and robust community. A commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion requires a detailed review of housing in and near the city, which will inform the specific actions, regulations, and enforcement that should be implemented to increase diversity of those living in the area. And I'm going to just briefly review the aspirational goals related to housing. The city commits to a clear and deep assessment of past and current housing realities in the city and within the entire Dublin School District and in the closely bordering neighborhoods. That assessment's not limited to reports on the current demographics of these residents, the housing and rental stocks, and documentation of specific practices, regulations, policies, and ordinances that affect who lives where. Oh, it's including all of that and not limited to these. So very broad. Our second aspirational goal is the city develops a long-term plan to significantly increase the number of affordable housing units in and nearby the city, which will increase the socioeconomic diversity of residents. I'd just like to point out to you that one of the measures of success under this goal is a recommendation that the City of Dublin prohibit source of income discrimination, which is something we just learned about from the legal staff. The third aspirational goal is the city deliberately and effectively increases the number of minority residents at all levels of affordability and wealth. Fourth, the city celebrates and strengthens the diversity that does exist among current residents. And finally, and it doesn't have to be the final one. If you guys have more input, we can have this, aspirational goals 6 and beyond. But right now, 5 seems to be what our subcommittee is settled on, and we feel pretty good about it. The 5th one is the city integrates housing related to DEI priorities within the Dublin Master Plan. So that is it on those 2 priority areas. I know it's a heck of a lot of info and a lot of words. But if anybody has any questions before we move back to the youth committee, just you can ask me, and maybe Esau and Erica would chime in. Okay.
Huge thanks to Bridget. She keeps saying the 3 of us, but she really did 98% of the work.
I wrote it. That was some work, but all the ideas are shared, and it was really fun. I've already told you guys how great my subcommittee is. Thank you.
We appreciate you, Bridget, very much.
Thank you for that update. We'll go ahead and swing back to the youth after we finish city and safety. With that being said, city subcommittee, is there any report you are bringing today?
So yeah, this is Homer, the assistant city manager. I just wanted to let you all know that where we are at right now, we have completed a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat assessment, done an appraisal, and some things that we've briefed you on in the past. But where we're going to from here is starting next Wednesday, Wednesday afternoons. I have a team coming together of city employees that we are going to be working on our internal diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. To get the goals set, to get the objectives set with that, the measurable objectives, And then from there, we will also be pulling together strategies on how we plan to achieve those objectives. And we're going to be meeting every week, Wednesday afternoon, probably from now until the end of July, until we get this, hammered out and get it done. So I just want to give you an update on, what we're doing, the action that we're taking, to get this pulled together. So if anybody has any questions, please, I'm here to answer whatever questions you may have.
Thank you for that, Homer. Moving on, we have safety update.
Good evening, Chair. The only update I have is that we have a meeting tomorrow with Wayne Maynard and Ajmeri Hawk as the chairs for the Chiefs Advisory Committee, and Mr. Shoji as well, to discuss our recommendations for the task force from the perspective of public safety. So we have that meeting tomorrow, and then next week we will hold our Chiefs Advisory Committee meeting for the month of May.
Thank you for that. Does anyone have any questions for the chief? Hearing no questions, we'll move back to the youth subcommittee. I'm going to reshare my screen that has the youth slide. So please give me 1 second.
Amy, I don't know if Will messaged you or not, but he's having mic troubles. So could you go over our indicators with the task force on his behalf?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so for the youth, one of our indicators is that the city includes 4 positions on the future Dublin DEI advisory board. They'll be filled by 1 senior representative from each high school and 1 from Emerald campus. Each member will represent schools within their high school tract alongside a deputy of a junior for succession planning. And obviously the number of positions could change depending on how big the future Dublin DEI advisory board is. So we're not overrepresenting the youth. And then our second one was that the city forms a formal youth advisory committee comprised of school representatives of the DEI advisory board, their informal deputies, and any other interested parties to effectively open communication between the city and Dublin youth regarding other concerns that are outside of DEI. The city will also work with Centero, Dublin Recreation Center, the Arts Council, and athletic teams to build and advertise diverse events and innovative approaches in an attempt to attract diverse interests and opportunities to engage youth. The city will also work with school representatives to strategically engage with Dublin youth at city events, roundtables, and youth-dedicated town halls.
Does anyone have any questions for the youth? Thank you for that update. Moving on, we are going to our update section. JM, is there any updates from the LGBTQ+?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, everyone. I have 3 items. 2 of them are general updates. So I want to share with you that there was a change in the law as it relates to birth certificates and the ability to change your name on birth certificates in Ohio. So that's now a possibility, and I believe that goes into effect June 1st, if I'm not mistaken. So that's great. That just leaves Tennessee as the one outlier in the United States that doesn't allow that. So I'm glad that we've joined everyone else in that respect. The second update is a point of pride for the community. Dublin has welcomed Evolution Theater to the Abbey Theater as a way to have their plays and their performances and their talents showcased for the community. Myself and the chief and the city manager attended one of their performances over on Friday evening. It was great. It was really proud. I was proud to have this art elevated in Dublin. So I appreciate all the support from the community, and I hope it's something that we can continue to celebrate. The only other item I have is I got a public comment today that was sent to City Council as well as to staff members. And it was a member of the public that was asking about the lights, as well as an opportunity to do a commemorative walk or some sort of countdown with respect to LGBTQ pride, as well as the city recognizing Juneteenth. And this has to do with the lights on the bridge. So there are plans that will light the bridge in support of those 2 events. But this individuals also asking if the city or the community rather wanted to take it a step further and celebrate it like, physically and maybe walk across the bridge or something of that sort. So I think it's something for this task force to think about and maybe share amongst your networks and see if that's something that is supported and wants to take place. But other than that, that's all the updates I have, and I'm happy to entertain any questions.
JM, I have a question. So that public comment, the last section, are they asking for some type of let's say community parade or event for those two events?
Yeah, if you want, I can read it very quickly because I don't want to take away from the comment, but I want to make sure you have all the information. It says, with summer fast approaching, I'm looking forward to this is the person, looking forward to some of the upcoming events in and around Dublin. In particular, I'm excited to see Dublin light up the link bridge on June 19th in recognition of Juneteenth, as well as recognizing Dublin's LGBTQ+ community by lighting the link in rainbow colors. Both are steps forward in making our city more inclusive and welcoming. Both are quote unquote first for Dublin, and I hope the occasions will be marked with something more than just a flip of a switch. Has the city considered a celebratory communal countdown or commemorative walk across the bridge for each of these events? With continued practice of social distancing and or masks for those who wish to wear them, a simple countdown followed by the lighting and a walk across the bridge could offer a safe and respectful gathering for any Dubliners who would like to celebrate these historic firsts. They're just talking about that in particular. Does that answer your question, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, thank you for that.
So again, this was directed towards the city council and staff, but I also think there's opportunity for the community to take a lead on this or show some sort of leadership effort in this.
Does anyone have any
Mr.
further? Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, if I could comment, I think one of the things that we get requests like this from a lot of different communities wanting the city to do, something in celebration of many things, and the one thing I think that we would take a look at is the city's role is really one of support and to try to set conditions to assist and help, but not necessarily be the lead and organizer for these. We really want, I'll use this as a specific example, the LGBTQ community to come forward and be the ones to sort of organize and present their ideas. And in the city, in its special event kind of a role, would certainly be there to support and help and assist in any way that we can. So that's probably the type of general response we would provide to these types of requests, because there's so many of them, that we just don't have enough staff to be able to organize the event for anybody and everybody who comes forward asking for recognition. I hope that doesn't sound in any way insensitive or unsupportive in any way. The point is we want to support it. It's that we need, when these requests come forward, for someone to come forward and help with that. I think a great example of that is the PAPA event that happened just Saturday. And I was going to ask the chief at some point to mention that, since Vincent couldn't be with us, that what a great event that the Asian Pacific Island group put together on the or the increase in hate crimes and the like, and anti-Asian sentiment that they were trying to address. It came forward as a group, put together a great event. The city was there to support in a supporting role, and actually are just better events when they're put together by the folks who want to advance that. So I just want to speak on behalf of the city to say we're here to support and want to help in any way we can for these types of requests. But to be the organizer is probably not enough of us to go around to do that in every situation, if that makes sense.
Does anybody else have any more questions for JM? All right, thank you for that update. Moving on to our next update, we have the Chiefs Advisory Committee.
Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. The Chiefs Advisory Committee met just a couple days after our task force met last month. We started out with sharing of recent events that had been happening regarding the anti-Asian hate movement, as well as some of the what was then an upcoming events, including the one that Dana just talked about. I was unfortunately not able to attend, so I will perhaps ask Chief to chime in, like Dana said. After the update, Chief actually had some updates for us, as he typically does, and talked about that very event on May the 15th, the fact that the city and the police in Dublin was supportive of that for the Asian community to come together, which is very much appreciated to know that the support is there. And that is tremendous for our organization. And I think all the minority organizations that that feel empowered with that. And then the chief talked about the CALIA accreditation. That stands for Commission for Accreditation on Law Enforcement Agencies, which Dublin has been accredited for 30 plus years, from what I understand. We are going through that process right now for the newest cycle, which I believe culminates with the on-site visit in November coming up. So I'm sure Chief and his team are working very hard on that. There was also a conversation on Senate Bill 18, which went into effect. Lieutenant Tabernick went over the preparation and training that the Dublin Police Department has already taken steps to complete. The bill covers restraint and confinement of pregnant or recently postpartum women in juvenile that may be at an increased risk of harm if caution is not exercised when trying to restrain them. So the Dublin Police Department training, I believe, dictates that if someone is not obviously pregnant, the police department personnel will actually ask if someone is pregnant or have given birth in the past 6 weeks, so as to not accidentally harm the women or juvenile. The restriction says that they are only to be handcuffed in case, or restrained or confined only in cases of emergencies, and if they are to be handcuffed, that they are to be handcuffed in front as opposed to the back. So these are the things that have been happening, and the police department has been training very hard for, and just to stay on top of all those changes. And we continued our discussion on community liaison officer program overview, and heard from various officers and had great discussions about the great work that they do, as well as the relationships that they build with the minority communities in Dublin. That was very much appreciated. That is my report. Chief, would you like to go over the May 15th event?
Yes, thank you, Sam. So May 15th was the Community Against Hate event, and we were very grateful to have Vincent Wong reach out to us and partner with us and allow us to be there and part of the event and sponsor the event from the City of Dublin and the Dublin Police Department. So there were probably around 80 to 100 in attendance at Coffin Park. Lieutenant Tabernick, Officer Paul Burks, Officer Amber McCloskey, and Officer Ian Kovacs and I all attended the event, and there were guest speakers, Ohio Representative Beth Liston, Hilliard Council Member Cynthia Vermillion, and Imran Malik, who is on the Chiefs Advisory Committee as well with us. All were guest speakers at the event as well. So the event was sponsored or organized by the Asian Pacific Islander American Public Affairs group, and ours in Dublin was one of several events occurring across the U.S. on Saturday, and then there was an event actually at Bicentennial in Columbus on Sunday as well. So as part of that event, one of the most remarkable pieces, and if you had the occasion to attend the vigil in Bridge Park I believe that was at the beginning of April. There were several youth speakers again on Saturday as part of the event at Kaufman Park who really are absolutely remarkable in sharing their personal perspectives and their reflections and their advocacy for, again, unity and addressing issues of anti-Asian hate in our community and communities across the U.S. And so that was really remarkable to be a part of, and very grateful that we were allowed to be included and there to support the event. At the end of the event, we took a unity walk around the park collectively as a group, and we actually were able to take a photo with our drone from above as well, which I know our communications and public information partners are going to share as part of our reflection and promotion after the event from Saturday as well. So again, I'm really grateful to be part of the event and look forward to opportunities in the future to continue to support and engage with our community members.
Thank you for that update. Does anyone have any other questions for the chief and ESO? Hearing no comments, we'll move on. We'll move on to new business. Is there any new business or discussion from the members of the task force that they would like to share?
Mr. Chair, I've got a couple things, but I didn't want to jump ahead of task force members, so.
Go ahead.
Okay. Just so everyone knows, I did have a meeting with Dr. Marshausen yesterday, the new Dublin City School Superintendent, obviously former Hilliard School Superintendent. I suggested he may want to attend your next meeting in June. I hope you don't mind that I suggested that. And he's amenable to doing that. Like, obviously, he's trying to get himself up and running and get his feet under him. And then he suggested that he would bring Dr. Hamilton, who is I'll get the title wrong, but I believe Dr. Hamilton's the new DEI coordinator for the schools, Dublin City School. And then, of course, there's a new superintendent being seated at Hilliard City School District. So we'll offer that invitation out as soon as I can get to know that person. So, so anyway, if that's okay with you all, we'll do that. And then also just want to mention that I also want to echo what JM said earlier about the Evolution Theater. Keep your eyes and ears open for that. They've got some really great shows coming up, fabulous production Friday night. And if you can get out and support that and attend the theater, the Abbey Theater would be great. And congratulations for the APAPA event that occurred. And then the last thing I would just throw out there is that probably I'm going to guess that it's very likely that in your June meeting could occur in person, the way that things are going and the way things are opening up. So would very much like to host everyone in person. That's a possibility. It may not be actually till July, depending on availability of our recording systems and things like that. Because what's interesting is while everything's kind of loosening up, we're also trying to get into a new council chambers. So we're in the process of kind of taking the old one apart and shifting it to the new one. So our timing was off by a couple of weeks, but we were guessing. And so we're trying to decommission the old council chambers. So if I can, I would certainly like to try to suggest we do that in person, but I got to work some logistics first and not over promising. I'd rather under promise and over deliver, but that would be a goal. But I would say certainly in July, and here we are, getting down the last couple of meetings, we could do that in person, but it'd be my best to try to pull that off in June if you're interested in doing that. And the rule sets allow us to do that. So we're reevaluating all the rule sets in the city. In fact, I was just reading through some proposed changes in our own policies right before this meeting as a result of the governor's announcement, the CDC announcements, trying to get everything into alignment. So stay tuned.
Thank you for that, Dana. Is there anybody else who has any other new business to talk about?
very quickly, Kofi, if you don't mind me jumping in here. So over the next couple of weeks, we're going to have to start throwing together our draft DEI plan. We all have contributed to this and put together a lot of the work already. I will be reaching out in an attempt to get the information that the subcommittees have put together to put into a single document for your review at our next meeting. So if you get an email from me, that's why.
Thank you for that. Any last updates from anybody? Hearing nothing new, I will accept the motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn, Kofi.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for the meeting today. Please have a nice and safe week. Bridget, please feel better and stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.